Welcome back to the second hour of our show. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dr. Ravi Batra on the line with us. Ravi Batra, RAVIBATRA.com. His website, he's the professor of economics at Southern Methodist University, internationally best-selling, New York Times best-selling author of numerous books, including Greenspan's Fraud, How 2 Decades of His Policies Have Undermined the Global Economy, and The New Golden Age, The Coming Revolution Against Political Corruption and Economic Chaos. Ravi, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Thom.
It's been too long since we've talked with you. We've got to make these things a little more frequent. I want to get your take on the G20. I want to get your take on what's going on overall. You know, the broad thing. I understand you can be with us for the entire hour and take calls from our listeners as well, sir.
That's right.
Okay, that's marvelous. First, I just wanted to mention we had a guest in the last hour, Dan Gaynor, who's a conservative think tank guy, who had read your book about the great crash of the 1990s that you predicted was coming, and spoke disparagingly of that. So I thought I would just give you an opportunity to respond very quickly, if you wish.
I'm sure he must have said we need to cut taxes, especially capital gains tax and the corporation tax. He must have said that because that's all they can think of, how to stimulate the economy. He must have ignored my message that excessive wealth concentration in the end brings about depressions. I'm sure he ignored that part, and he must have derided that part where excessive wealth concentration is the cause of our economic problems. And I said that long time ago.
Yeah, I would say that, your timetable was off by a small amount with that particular book, although you nailed it dead on with your most recent book. And with actually the two most recent books, but your analysis of why this Great Depression was coming was absolutely totally spot on, in my humble opinion.
And not only that, since nobody else believed in that, it was pretty tough to put this message through that it's the excessive wealth concentration that will do it. And remember, I'm teaching at SMU, which is a private university run by private donations, and then you are deriding wealth concentration. Boy, I went through took a lot of personal insults and many more things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because of that message.
And now SMU is going to be the home for the George W. Bush Memorial Library.
Right.
And oh man, it's and I don't want to get you in political trouble here, so I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. But I'm just thinking that the faculty meetings there must be really interesting. In any case, back to the issue at hand. We're talking with Dr. Ravi Batra, our favorite professor of economics and author of some just absolutely brilliant books. If you haven't read them, you are not economically literate. Greenspan's Fraud, How 2 Decades of His Policies Have Undermined the Global Economy, and The New Golden Age, The Coming Revolution Against Political Corruption and Economic Chaos. His website, RaviBatra.com, RAVIBATRA.com. Ravi, where are we at right now?
Well, I would love to say that we are at the beginning of the bottom, but I am sorry to say that we are at the beginning of a depression. The reason being the simple logic, which I have emphasized lately. In the Great Depression of 1990, I said that excessive wealth concentration would do it. But I still was not totally clear about the logic, how it would come, and then I saw them postponing this calamity for years and years. Then the logic became clear, and that logic I put in the two books that you just mentioned. And the logic is simple: productivity is rising too fast, wages are not rising at all. Productivity is the main source of supply. Wages are the main source of demand. So you have overproduction in the economy if productivity rises very fast and wages don't. And what the government and the Federal Reserve have been doing is they have been postponing this overproduction by creating more and more debt in the economy, because this new debt will also raise demand to the level of supply.
Right.
But remember one thing, productivity rises exponentially. So if wages don't rise and productivity keeps rising, that means debt has to rise exponentially to create a balance in the economy. And then you can just use your imagination that debt possibly cannot rise exponentially. A day would come when the consumers, the workers or consumers have been maxed out in borrowing.
Right.
The banks have loaned out so much money that they will not be paid back, and then there would be a terrible banking crisis and a terrible overproduction problem because it had been in the making over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
And the whole thing started in 1981.
Can I try and rephrase that in very layman's terms, and you tell me if I've got it right? Because obviously an economy is based on supply and demand, and the source of supply is productivity, the source of demand is wages. We had wages and supply and productivity basically tracking each other for decades, for centuries.
Until 1980, that's right.
Right, up until 1980.
Almost 200 years. They tracked each other.
Right. And then as a consequence of the policies of Ronald Reagan and his voodoo economics and Mr. Greenspan's libertarian economic policies, Greenspan stepped in and Reagan stepped in, busting up unions and whatnot, and basically wages flattened out. That line began to flatten rather than going up up a hill, whereas productivity continued to go up. So something had to fill that gap. And what filled that gap initially was people using their credit cards. Then they started maxing out their credit cards, and so Greenspan said, well, let's let them use their homes as an ATM. So people started refinancing against their homes. And those two things, those injections of, and credit became much easier to get. I remember in the 70s how hard it was. I got my first American Express card when I was 24 years old, and I was making more money than my dad was. It was a big deal to get a credit card back in the 70s, early 70s. And so by making credit easy, the American consumer filled in that gap. Now we've reached the point in the last year and a half or so, and this is where I'm asking you to reality check me on this. Now we've reached the point where that gap between productivity and demand, between supply and demand, it can no longer be filled by the consumer's credit because so many people are losing the assets that they have in their home and they're maxed out their credit cards, that the government is stepping in and producing trillions of dollars of debt and public works projects, and that's not going to be enough to fill the hole either because we still haven't addressed the underlying issue, which is that wages are still not in track with productivity. Do I have that right?
Well, basically, yes. And there are two problems here. The government is indeed spending a lot of money, but it is misdirected, mostly misdirected. This is the other point I was about to make. Why I feel that a depression is on its way is that the government does not really, first of all, doesn't know the true source of the problem, which is the wage productivity gap. And secondly, it is misdirected in its spending. Mm-hmm. Now, in an economy, we all know that a lot of people will tell you that 70% of the U.S. economy is driven by consumers.
Right.
And about 10 to 15% is driven by investment. Mm-hmm. And investment is where you need all this lending by the banks. Home purchase and also business investment, they're financed by bank lending quite a lot. So that's where the bank lending comes in. Right. Now, Obama and George Bush and Hank Paulson and now Geithner, they're all focusing on the banking crisis, that means they're focusing on the 15% part of the economy and ignoring the 70% part.
Right, which is the wages, it's the workers.
And the consumers. Wages, workers, consumers, wages are all the same thing.
Right.
So they're ignoring the 70% part of the economy, focusing on 15%, and that's what I'm saying. The spending that they are doing by trillions is misdirected,
right?
And that's why I think the economy is moving towards.
Instead, that money should be spent how? With things like unemployment insurance, increasing the minimum wage.
That money should be. I will go step by step. Right now, the economic atmosphere is so bad that it won't be easy to raise the minimum wage at this point. So I will proceed I will undertake two or three different steps before I increase the minimum wage. What I will first do is to give a hefty, say 20% auto tax credit, 20% tax credit for anybody who wants to buy a car made in America. an American-made car.
Interesting.
That was the first thing.
Dr. Ravi Batra, we've got to take a break here. That's step one. We'll pick up step two on the other side of the break, and then we'll be picking up your calls for Dr. Batra as well. We're talking with Dr. Ravi Batra, the esteemed professor of economics at Southern Methodist University, internationally best-selling author of numerous books, including Greenspan's Fraud and The New Golden Age, The Coming Revolution Against Political Corruption. RaviBatra.com, his website. Stick around.